going to do some housekeeping here. I asked for the house lights to come up a bit so that we have more of a feeling, not of the Chris McCluskey show, but more like you're in my living room. I got a really big living room today, but you're in my living room, and I'm just going to kind of spread my materials out and hopefully have a sweet time of connecting. No PowerPoint presentation today. Love that, but what I would like to be able to do this morning is to speak to your heart as much or probably a lot more actually than I speak to your head. This is not going to be a 7-point sermon. This is going to be something that actually, since we know that you're probably going to forget most of what I say today anyway, that you catch the spirit of what I share, and that sticks with you 25, 30, 50 years from now. So that's the spirit of what we're looking for to do. As Taylor introduced me there, I am known as this dubious title of the father of Christian coaching. My background is actually as a psychotherapist, and that was the career for which I prepared, and actually what I figured I would be doing all of my professional life was as a psychotherapist. And in my mid to late 20s, I had already headed up to my eyeballs with at least the secular world. What was coming in fast and furious at the time was what we came to lovingly call mangled care. Anybody familiar with the managed care? We call it damaged care sometimes. It was changing my field from the field of psychotherapy to what they now call behavioral health care. And I just did not like the things that it was doing because it seemed to be much more addressing just behavior and no longer exploring why are we doing the things we're doing in the first place. And if there's brokenness there, can we bring healing? No, instead it's these are the behaviors that you can target. And so once those target behaviors are cleared up in 6 weeks, then you can say that you succeeded. And I said, that feels like a Band-Aid. Kind of reminded me of the old hee-haw gag. You remember the old show where they'd come in and say, Doc, it hurts when I do this. And he'd say, well, don't do that. And that was supposed to have fixed it. So in psychotherapy anyway, I had a wonderful season of my career. And when I had it up to my eyeballs with that, I decided, if I'm going to stay in this field, I am either going to open up a distinctly Christian practice and separate it entirely from managed care and run it as a fee-for-service practice, or I'm going to have to go do something else. So that is, in fact, what I did. I wouldn't say it was a courageous, bold move. I'm not sure it was so visionary. It was more just, I know what I'm not going to do. So, Lord, I hear the desires that are on my heart here for something that I believe is in line with the gifting and calling that you have on my life. And so I established a practice in Clearwater, Tampa Bay area called Christian Care Counseling Centers. And as I said, it's entirely fee-for-service, no sliding scale. That meant that we drew a lot of persons from the church. We became one of the primary referrals of choice for about 600 and some odd churches in the Bay Area. But we had a large referral base because if we were not able to serve everybody, since we're not a nonprofit, we had to be able to refer our brothers and sisters out to other places where they could get service. That practice grew to become the largest practice in the Tampa Bay area. So again, I figured this is what I'm going to be doing the rest of my professional career. God laughs and he says, well, I have other things for you. Just hang on for the ride. What began to happen is that actually doing that, as much as I loved what was happening on the professional front, I was coming home of an evening. Now, I only worked about 10 minutes from our home, so it was a very nice, short commute, little bedroom community called Dunedin, Florida, just north of Clearwater, where the practice actually was. But I was coming home to my wife, Rachel, who is with me here today. Rachel had our first child and then our second child, and now she had our third child. And I was increasingly coming home at the end of the day and realizing, wow, I'm missing a lot of what really is what matters the most to me in the world, which is the shaping and the pouring in and the experiencing of life with these dear ones. And I have a picture that I keep at our house in a frame because it was one of those laser moments where everything comes into clear view. I had come home one night I only worked Monday through Friday. I kept my weekends relatively free. Sometimes there was that Saturday where you had to go and do the books and such. But otherwise, my boundaries were pretty good. Monday through Friday, very nice practice, many therapists and interns working for me. I would sometimes scoot home even for lunch. But I had come home late on Thursday night because that was group night. So I did a group therapy session for men on Thursdays. I came home, and this picture is of Rachel in her rocking chair with our kids all piled on top of her. We had runny noses and a little bit of croupy stuff going on. So Rachel is asleep in the chair, just dead to the world, and she's got our, probably at the time, 6-year-old daughter, Alyssa, curled up. We called her spaghetti legs, long legs, but she managed to crawl on one arm of this thing, and she's in there. There's a big roll of toilet paper for all the snotty noises. Our little boy, Colin, who was 4 at the time, is cuddled up there in a little teeny-weeny ball, and then little baby Grace is just sprawled out in her sleep paper. And, so they're all out. Daddy has walked in. Well, Rachel was pregnant, actually, with number 4. So there were 5 people, the people I care about the most in the world, in that chair. And it was obvious that a lot had happened that day, and my dear wife was probably really wishing that her husband had been here. I could not be, and that's the reality of the world. So I didn't beat myself up for it. But it was a clarion call to say, man, the desire of my heart would be that if there is anywhere in the world, Lord, that I could be at home with my family, and not just an entrepreneur, but able to be at my home with my family, so there's much more interactive on a daily basis. That would be the desire of my heart. I just recognized the desire. I heard the call so clearly. Well, our 6-year-old by that point, we had looked at the education system in the area. Rachel was a teacher prior to us beginning to have kids. We've been married 29 years now this summer. And she had looked at the school system where we were, and she said, we cannot have the kids go to this particular public school system. We were beginning to have this larger family. We realized the parochial school, some kind of private school, was at least going to be very, very expensive if you keep having children. We had a desire for more children than what we already had. So we had kind of backdoored this whole new field at the time of homeschooling. And it seemed pretty weird. In fact, today, still 20-some-odd years later, it still seems a little bit unusual. But at that time, it was pretty radical, pretty outside the box. Well, the coaching that I do, that I'm called now the father of Christian coaching, is all about helping people to think outside the boxes, to listen to the desires of our hearts, and then to begin, if we feel strongly enough about them, to operationalize those, to start to plan and to goal set, and to begin to follow through very intentionally, and to see whether or not the things that you think God might be calling you to, in fact, find fruition far beyond your wildest dreams. That's what that field was about. I wasn't doing that at the time. But based on those principles, Rachel and I began experimenting with homeschooling these kids. So there was another piece of the puzzle here plugging in. I'm not only missing the interaction that family would have, but even at the season that normally kids are going off to public school, instead the kids are with Rachel. And I realized, man, if I could work at home, and we stick with this homeschooling thing. We weren't sure we were going to, but we figured, how badly could you possibly screw up kindergarten, right? I mean, it's just not. So we experimented, and then that kind of went like so-so. But, the next year, first grade, how badly could you possibly screw up first grade? So we were hooked after our second year, but somewhere in that, our child being 5, 6, 7 years old, we were realizing if I could work at home, I would be portable, and that means that as a family unit, the world becomes our classroom. But that was a big if, because as a psychotherapist, if you're not in the chair, you're not making money, and so I had to leave and do the typical commute that we're all used to. So long story short, I began a move toward closing down the therapy practice, and we began listening more and more and nurturing a call, a song that we felt like we were hearing in our hearts as a couple to not only be with the family and homeschool and have me be able to work at home, but wouldn't it be something if we could live in the country instead of a densely populated metropolitan area? We loved where we were, very close to the Pinellas Trail, 5-minute ride to the beach. It was great, but we had this desire for wider open spaces. And so just listening and being before the Lord, spending time in prayer and fasting and what we called our tea times at night and such, we just kept listening to these bits and pieces. Someone has once said, when I'm sharing personal stories, they have said, I would speak about others if I knew anyone else half so well as I know myself. So what I'm doing with you today is sharing with you pieces and parts of self, not to be braggadocious and not to just get up here and yak about myself, but instead to share a story that hopefully is illustrative of what a Christian coach does and what each of you as leaders in business and in ministry, all the different places where you have influence, provides a picture, a capture of some of the spirit of what you want to bring in your relationship with the people you're called to influence the most, those with whom you spend actually a bulk of your time here on earth. That's the idea of what these stories are about. And so, in being willing to embrace that vision and start to move proactively toward it, I hired my first coach. The field was a new coach. I didn't know what a coach meant. When I picture coach, I'm thinking somebody on the sidelines yelling and screaming and maybe throwing chairs, or at least telling you what you need to be doing and how to do it. And I knew that wasn't what was needed. To my delight, I discovered that a coach doesn't work from the outside in. They don't tell you what to do. They're not advising. Nobody else knows the desires of my heart. I'm only discerning them now, right? But a coach comes along and says, well, let's listen together and let's begin to draw out from the inside out more of what it is that God may be actually speaking to you and what it would look like if that saw fulfillment. saw fruition. So I hired a coach and said, okay, I'm used to being a therapist. That means there's a problem, and in a reactive mode, we're going to work at healing that problem. A coach says there is no problem. There is a vision. There is a passion. There is desire. Let's meet you in that and identify the gap between where you are now and where you would like to go, and let's operationalize that. So on a continuum of people helping, if you will, you've got brokenness to stability to health and fullness of everything God created and called us for. Does that make sense? That this is an application of psychology integrated with our Christian worldview and faith of the understanding that God knew us before he knit us together in our mother's wombs. And he knew the plans that he had for us. And they were plans to prosper us and not for calamity. And I'm not preaching prosperity gospel. I'm saying if he says, I delight in giving you the desires of your heart, it's not that, I desire a motorcycle. Hey, look at that, a motorcycle. It's that he is saying, I place within you, I give you the desires of your heart. And then if you will listen and dare to risk and believe and follow and discern, I will give you the desires of your heart because they are my desires. I've taken up habitation in you. My spirit communes with your spirit. And so the desires that you hear there, when people say to me oftentimes, I can't discern how the Lord's calling. I'm not sure that the Lord is really telling me this. People, if we are walking on a daily basis in good fellowship with the Father, and we are known by him and he by us, can we trust the desires of our hearts? If we can't at all, woe to us. If we can, then we still seek to pray and fast and bounce them off of those who are trusted advisors, counselors, or coaches, and then to embrace them and to begin to operationalize them. He's not left us here to fumble around. So that was what I did. I hired a coach, and long story short, we closed down the therapy practice. We actually, during that season, having let my parents know that we were serious about possibly moving to the country, totally unbeknownst to us, my mother looked into the childhood farm that she grew up on when she was a little girl. 5 years old for about 15 years old. So all of her grade school years, she had gone to school in a little one-room schoolhouse with a potbelly stove. My mom is only 71, I think, now. But she had gone to a little one-room schoolhouse. This is a little house on the prairie kind of time. It was in the middle of Missouri, dirt road, middle of nowhere. And that's how she had grown up, in a home that only had an outhouse. They did eventually have electricity, but no running water inside. And she had looked into the childhood farm that she grew up on, for which she had always pined after it sold out of the family when she was 15 years old. And my folks came to Rachel and I at a certain point, and they said, you guys aren't going to believe what we've done, but we bought the farm. That's not usually what you want to hear from your parents, But in this case, it was like, no, seriously? You bought the family farm? Yeah, we have no idea what we're going to do with it. There's not a bit of world pressure in the world for you to move there, but we bought this 440-acre farm that Mom grew up on. It was in foreclosure for 3 years. Who knew? We bought it for a song. We might retire there someday. We may at least vacation. We may just turn around and sell it. We don't know. But it's there. If you feel like that's how the Lord is calling you, knock yourselves out. I think that might be part of the vision here. Could be wrong, but we prayed, and basically there's where we moved. So we are out on this little dirt road on this beautiful, rolling 440-acre farm, which has been neglected for 25 years. It was an absolute dump. I mean, the place was just overrun everywhere. We had coyotes coming into the backyard in the middle of the day when the kids were playing outside, except we stopped that relatively quickly until we got some more clearing done. They were taking chickens right out. We decided, hey, we're in the country, we're going to have chickens. We didn't know a thing about the country, but it was just a wild, wild place. So as we began to embrace more of the fullness of me doing this coaching thing, transitioning my skill set and working from home, and we're homeschooling the kids now as Alyssa, our oldest, was 7 years old by now. And we get out there to the country, of course, 7 years old. Most of you girls know that's when you get horse crazy, right? So you're in the country, you got to have a horse. So we got chickens, we got ducks, we got horses. I made the mistake of getting a pony. I didn't know that there was so much difference in temperament between horses and ponies. But we're settling into the property. So a friend of ours in the area thought it'd be a great hoot to bring over pygmy goats. The little tiny, they're cute as can be, little lawnmowers. They're not good for them. You can't milk them. There's nothing else you can do unless you're going to slaughter them, and you just don't do that with goats that you name. So our chickens are named too, so we don't slaughter them either. We just eat their eggs. But he thought it'd be great fun if we brought over 4 little pygmy goats. So we had those, and then one day we came home from church, and he thought it would be hilarious if he brought over a billy. And so without our consent, there's a billy in there with our 4 goats. So now we're breeding pygmy goats, okay? So the adventure of the farm is coming to fruition. The kids are having a ball. I'm out actually embracing and celebrating with Rachel. We're in the space now. So much of what we dared to dream and listen to and even just kind of fantasize about our vision cast, what would it be like, has now become fruition. So this is like what happens for many of you in your businesses, right? When you see the signage go up and the brick and mortar is set and the ministry is rolling out, or the employees are coming in, or the market numbers are going up, and you start to say, wow, it's really happening. So Rachel and I are walking on a portion of the property up on one of the buildings that we had reclaimed out in the kind of on a knoll away from the house. And we now call it the stables. So we had renovated it for the horses and the little goats, and it had some roof work done. So I had my arm around her like this, and I'm pointing to her as to what was happening up there. And I turned this way, and as I stepped, from my peripheral vision, I saw writhing. And I recognized instantly there's a snake. And so I shot my legs out like this, just instinctively, and looked down, and there is a full-grown copperhead in strike position right here. Looking now, you can't do anything from this position. And I said, oh, baby, it's a copperhead. And she must have flown because she's way over here. She says, what do? I said, run down to the house and get my gun. Now you got to ask yourself, which one's worse? I've got a copperhead down here in strike position, or I'm going to have my wife shoot the copperhead down here. This is true. I'm not making this up. So she goes running down to the house, and fortunately, my brother, who had by that time also listened to his heart and moved to a different section of the farm, lives about 1/8 of a mile away from us across the pond. He came out of his place. Rachel says, Chris is standing over top of a copperhead. Michael hollers up, don't move. I'm not going anywhere. Now, he says it only took him a couple minutes to get there. I say it was half an hour. But I'm looking at this thing literally, and I did the only thing that any of you would have done. I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, you are not going to bite me, and we are going to kill you. In the name of Jesus Christ, you are not going to bite me, and we are going to kill. That's all I did. What do? You pray. When those crises hit, and everything that you were just celebrating and enjoying comes crashing in, and you're staring into the face of the serpent, you simply claim the power of the blood. And that's what I did. My brother came up, shot the thing. That snake is the hat band around my little cowboy hat that I now wear out there. All right. That's true. So there is a story. It's our story. By this point, if you haven't decided that I'm flaky or crazy, which some of you may have, just recognize this. When we listen to desires and passions and visions for the things that we believe God has created and called us to, they probably will seem crazy to a lot of other folks. And I'm betting a lot of you have had many well-intentioned friends and family hear your desires of your heart, hear the things that you were pretty sure God was calling you to, and they have said to you, man, I love you, but dude, that's crazy. And we would say, well, yeah, outside of the call. But if the call is there, it's crazy to ignore it. Scripture says very clearly, the gifts and the call of the Lord are irrevocable. Does that mean that we're necessarily going to discern them, or even upon discerning them that we're going to embrace them and do anything with them? No, it doesn't actually, sadly. There's this thing called cooperation on our part. There's this thing called discernment on our part. There's this thing called accessing the power of the Spirit and the courage that He provides, the boldness to step into it. But the gifts and the call of the Lord are irrevocable. They're not going to be taken back. And so a coach is someone in the Christian world who can come along and help us discern and listen to and embrace and dare to risk and to follow through. This talk today is called The Leader, which is all of you in your spheres of influence and responsibility, for which will be judged before the throne, right? The leader as coach. And again, that's not outside in, tell them what to do, set the protocol, tell them how to do it and when to do it. That is inside out, meet them in a relational connection, much more about your being than your doing. Meet them relationally, those who are entrusted to your care, and listen with those spirit ears, listen to the Spirit communing between you and within you to help them discern and draw out. If we've been told by Jim Collins that we got to make sure we get the right people on the bus, we also got to help figure out where they're supposed to be on the bus, right? Who's in the right seat? Who needs to be shuffling around? There are constant people decisions that we have to wrestle with. That's where a coach, all of you leader as coach, can plug in. We listen to the desires of the heart. We clarify vision and calling. We make plans. We follow through. And we look to steward well the things that are entrusted to us. Scripture says that when we are called to leadership, as all of us are in this room, that one of the things that the church is to use as a template or a gauge for discerning whether or not someone should be placed into a position of responsibility as leader is how are they doing on the home front, right? Because if you're showing forth evidence, fruit, good fruit in your responsibility as parents on the home front, then just like the scripture principle, if you've been faithful with a little, you'll be placed over much. Then those are to be the leaders who are helping the church grow. So a model that we might look at is the model of father or mother. And yet, I wouldn't want to call this talk the leader as parent, because we're not the mommies and daddies of our employees. But hear this. This is perhaps one of the primary places where this main spirit of what I want you to catch comes together. We are not the mothers and fathers. We're not maternal or paternal in our interaction with our people that are entrusted to our care. We call them our employees. But we are not simply their employers. Words have meaning, and because they have meaning, they have power. And there is a very common word that we use typically when we're talking about the part of our business that interfaces with our employees, and that is the HR department, the Human Resources Department. I don't like that phrase, because human beings are much more than resources. Our people are not simply a means to our ends. They are not simply some interchangeable cog or piece of the machinery for the thing that we feel like God has called us to. I've been in companies back when I was in somebody else's employment in which I knew I was a Bic pen. Great tool, love this Bic pen. Oh, it's not working anymore. I throw it out and get another one. That is not what our people are. All of us as leaders are called into personnel development. I love that phrase for what we do with our people because they're persons, and they're persons created in the image of God. And we are looking to develop, to draw out the fullness of who they were created to be in those capacities that they play within the work environment. They're on the right bus and they're in the right seat. But we are also looking to develop their whole person. And that's the power of an organization like Convene that says, hey, let's talk about how to do that, how to make that happen, how to be so relationally connected with our people that what we're doing with them is flowing from our being with them. We are invested in personnel development, not simply utilization of human resources like all the other resources that we have. I think God's bottom line has to do with finances. I mean, he certainly used a lot of financial references when Jesus was talking about for example, the parable of the talents and bringing 30, 60, 100-fold, right? Okay, he understood the marketplace. He was, as was said last night, a business owner. He definitely understood entrepreneurism, that there is a place for the bottom line. But I think God's bottom line is quite different than what shows up on most of our P&L sheets. And ultimately, he is only about people and love and developing the fullness of that call and those giftings which were irrevocable, are irrevocable, and are being used, again, as was said just last evening, not simply here on this plane, but gang, we're just going to step right across to the next world, right? And we continue on 1,000 years from now, we will still be working in the kingdom in fullness and joy. We're not just going to be standing around singing 7 days a week. That's one set of skills that will be being used, but there's work to do on the other side. You all, as leaders, are developing brothers and sisters, those who we hope will be inheriting eternity with us, in the very skills, giftings, and callings that they will be utilizing not just here on this earth and not just to provide for their families and put a roof over their heads, but for eternity. Their gifts and call are irrevocable, and you are privileged to be helping them discern them, call them forth, and utilize them to the fullness of the Lord, that there is a return brought to his glory. So if I've said we are not their parent and we are not simply their employer, I find a middle ground in this notion of being a coach. Now, I'm not going to describe all of the things that a coach does and doesn't. We did spend that entire day with the chairs on Wednesday doing a pre-con training on a coach approach to leadership. But that's for a different talk because that gets into skills and tools and techniques, the doing kinds of things. I'm sticking with the being here, the bigger spirit of you embracing the notion of being a coach in your role as leader, not their parent, but not simply their employer. That coaching role, most of us can relate to because at some season of our lives, we had a really great experience with a coach. It might have been a sport coach, or it might have been like a music coach, a voice coach, a debate coach in school. It might have been someone who was like a cub master or a scout master or a youth pastor. But it was somebody who was doing something more than simply interacting with us in their role of authority and leadership. They were invested in us. They were tuning in to us, our being at a deep level, and we knew it. And it changed us. And for those of us who maybe came from broken homes, broken families, where maybe mom or dad was taken away from us, or both perhaps, sometimes those coaches are the single person that we look to in this life and say, that person had more of an influence on who I am today than anybody else. That's the model of coach that I want you to be grabbing here with regard to your role as leader. We have the opportunity to be so used in the lives of our people while we still attend to the bottom line and still do amazing things for the kingdom through the power that he provides. But we are developing our people relationally, spiritually, like the best coach you can think of. So if you've got one in your mind, hold it and use it as a reference point, a template for you to look back on when you're trying to discern, Lord, how is it that you've called me to integrate some of this material from this Convene conference this weekend? Proverbs 20, verse 5 has one of the verses that I love in teaching on Christian coaching, and it simply says this: the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. Your role as leader coach is to help them discern and draw out, call forth, embrace, invest, multiply those desires of their heart in the deep waters of who they are. Effective leadership is about so many things, and it's so much more than just skills and tools and techniques, although we do constantly have a learning curve, and most of us, if we're honest, I hope we recognize, man, I'm so far from where I want to be in terms of my leadership skills. But however much skill we have and don't have, remember that your doing always flows from your being. There is direct connection there. Most of what I have shared today you will forget. Most of what you interact with your people around in their annual reviews or in your face-to-faces, actually they'll forget. Learning theory shows us that. We retain very little, but we retain a tremendous amount of what is caught, not just taught. And that catching of something happens relationally. And then there are words spoken. As St. Francis is so often cited as encouraging the church to preach the gospel at all times and sometimes use words. We're preaching it with our lives. We're preaching it all the time experientially to our people. Together in that desire, I'm going to encourage you. Each of you have some kind of interaction, those of you who are members, with your Convene chair. I will tell you this, I came into that all-day training anticipating addressing some skills, tools, and techniques, and so much happened in the sweet spirit of that room with those 30-some-odd chairs that by the end of the day, the chairs themselves were erupting in this goofy singing of Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and they all sang the whole song. You'd think we were drunk or something. I mean, it's just raucous, fun play because there was so much connecting, such a sweet spirit, such a standing up and recognizing what God had done. Well, all of you have relationship with these chairs, and that is the heart of what Convene is about, is life on life, discipleship in the marketplace. So as you experience your relational connection in your one-on-ones and your forum groups with the people that you're going through this season of your life with, recognize probably these are the people you want to go through the rest of your life with. We want to grow old together because our callings are going to keep morphing. And as you experience them in that relationship, recognize there is a template there for you to draw from in going back to your place of position and influence and interacting with your people. as you do personnel development, not simply utilization of human resources. So that's where I'm going to leave us today. I believe, Lorna, we're going to do a little bit of an interview here on the leader as coach. Is that right?